The number one blocker of creative output is not natural talent. It's fear. Fear is the poisonous force that robs us of our most profound ideas. And it's right, simply put, fear and creativity cannot coexist. And so I think it's a primary role of leaders today to be able to create environments that are safe, where all ideas are celebrated, the good, bad, the ugly.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Whole Brain at Work podcast. I'm Karim Morgan-Nehdi. I'm a CEO, an entrepreneur, investor, and scientist focused on how thinking impacts organizations and teamwork. And so in my work leading Herrmann and also in building a new startup, Ned.ai, and also in working with thousands of leaders and teams around the world, I've gone pretty deep in understanding the interplay between how we think, how we work together, how we use technology, and especially as it relates to creativity. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Herrmann-Nehdi, who is Herrmann's chief thought leader and chairwoman, and who for decades has worked with some of the most incredible leadership teams in the world to help them unlock their creative potential. And creativity is where we're going to focus today. Our guest today is Josh Linkner. He's a 5-time entrepreneur whose companies have collectively generated hundreds of millions of dollars in value. He's the New York Times bestselling author of 4 books on creativity and leadership, a venture capitalist who's invested more than 100 early-stage startups, and perhaps most exciting to be, a professional jazz guitarist. His work spans business, the arts, and philanthropy, all anchored by a deep commitment to unlocking human potential. Josh, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much. Great to be with you both.
All right. So, Josh, you said that everyone has untapped creativity, regardless of role or background. What do you think helps people discover that spark for themselves?
Well, you and I share this passion for human creativity, and I've been researching this for decades. The research is crystal clear that all human beings, and I mean all of us, we are built to be creative. Some might even say that's our calling, why we're even on the planet. I mean, the first instinct is to create more humans. I mean, that's a creative process. So the thing about it is that many of us have unlearned that skill rather than developed the skill. It's been said that kids enter kindergarten with a full set of colorful crayons and graduate high school with a single blue ballpoint pen. And it's not teachers' fault, by the way. Teachers are heroes, but we have this dormant capacity, this natural part of who we are. We're hardwired to be creative, but we've been trained to suppress it. We've been trained to think that, wrongly, it only applies in certain roles or certain areas of life. The truth is, it can apply everywhere. Every box on an org chart can apply in your family, in your community, with your kids, et cetera. There's room for creative expression. When you sit down and have a conversation with a friend, that's a creative act. When you are trying to reimagine where to put the couch in the living room, that's a creative act. So I really believe that we can all step into this notion of that we're all artists. That doesn't have to be smug, like wearing a beret and painting on a canvas, but the idea is artists challenge conventional wisdom rather than blindly comply with it. They're willing to add an artistic or creative bent to things. And I really believe that if we can bring that capacity out, unlock that dormant creative capacity, the world's a better place. So I really feel like I'm on a bit of a mission or a calling to help people do that. There's 8 billion people on the planet with dormant creative capacity, me included, by the way. And the more that we can help extract that, bring it to the surface and put it into use, there's a lot of challenges in the world, and I think we can solve many of them with this capacity.
That's so interesting. And it reminds me of a story that one of our clients at Pfizer told on a webinar we did with them not long ago. And this was within their supply chain part of their business, right? And, in any pharmaceutical company, the supply chain unit, their job is to make sure that medicine gets from the factory to the patient without any quality issues whatsoever, right? So not what you think of as a typical creative field, right? And this was at a moment, not the current CEO, but a previous CEO, did what so many CEOs, probably myself included, do, and they say from on high, "Thou shalt innovate," right? And so the head of the supply chain group sort of said, "Okay, well, what the hell does this mean for us?" Right? And had to start to figure that out. And they had been using our tools and whole brain thinking as a part of some of their work as an organization, and they used it to design what they called the innovator in you, which basically gave everyone within that supply chain unit, from the person who's putting the medicine into the protective seal so that it gets from point A to point D safely, to those who were really helping to manage some of the processes. It gave them the right, it gave them safety to be able to be an innovator and to find what innovation meant for them and to contribute ideas. And So they established change agents and created different activities, different environments. You could call them test kitchens within a pharmaceutical factory, at least, that were conducive to innovation. And within a very short period, they had unlocked millions in value just by saying, you're allowed to do this. So it says to me that, as Amy Edmondson and many others research shows, psychological safety is so important about unlocking that creative potential.
You're exactly right. So the number one blocker of creative output is not natural talent. It's fear. Fear is the poisonous force that robs us of our most profound ideas. And it's right. Simply put, fear and creativity cannot coexist. And so I think it's a primary role of leaders today to be able to create environments that are safe, where all ideas are celebrated, the good, bad, the ugly. Now, it's not throwing judgment to the wind. You're not going to do something inappropriate in real life, but it's willing to consider what's possible and provide that breathing space for your team. And when you put people in the right conditions, because this is a natural thing, it blossoms naturally, kind of like a greenhouse. So if your greenhouse is all toxic and has no sunlight or humidity, plants will die. You have a beautiful greenhouse that's equipped properly, plants will grow. Same thing for creativity. So that's to me, one of the most crucial roles of leaders today is to create kind of that greenhouse that is conducive. Fear is removed, psychological safety is there. There's some space and time to apply creativity, and that will start to blossom naturally in a very beautiful way.
We all talk about, okay, take away the fear, just go for it. But we know that enterprise cultures, that's really hard to actually create. So I'm curious, from your experience, as you look at the leaders that you've worked with, the places that you've explored, what are the things that leaders can actually do, right, practically do to get rid of that block? Because so many people come in with that built in as like having grown up with it, right? And so, they've got that baggage. So there's that unlearning that has to happen. So what have you seen that really works practically for leaders? What can they do?
You're so right. And by the way, cliches, I know you weren't recommending this, but just go for it. Come up with ideas. Yeah. That never works. Like that's a terrible approach. So what is a good approach? Putting structure, tactics, and rituals around it. And I could, we could spend hours talking about it, but I'll give you one example. One of the people I interviewed in my most recent book, Big Little Breakthroughs, is really, credible social entrepreneur, and he had this cool thing and is humming really well. And I asked him at the end of my interview, how do you keep your team motivated? Like, how do you keep them creative once something's already working? He said, yeah, and without hesitation, he said, well, every Friday, we have something we call F Up Fridays. And he said, he said the whole word, I'll be polite today, but what he described is that he brings the whole team together and one by one during a brown bag lunch, they each have to stand up and proudly share what they effed up that week and what they learned from it. Inevitably, you get to somebody that didn't F something up and everyone's like, well, why not? What are you going to try next week? And so this simple zero-cost ritual, think about the message that it's sending, that part of your job is to push the boundaries, that we have your back in both success and failure, that we understand there's going to be some stumbles in order to unlock innovation. We have a tolerance for it. So sending all these great messages. Now, people don't have to do that exact thing, but I've made them work with companies that have done corporate get out of jail free cards, encouraging people to take responsible risks. And there's failure of the year awards that I've been a part of. And so I think it's setting up rituals and rewards, even at a tactical level. And because that's such a good question, I just want to dig a little deeper. Brainstorming, which is generally the mechanism that people use to generate ideas, sucks. It's a out-of-date, flawed system to yield mediocrity. Because you hit it. When you share an idea in a normal brainstorm session, you're like responsible for the idea. So if I share an idea, everyone else in the room becomes the self-appointed idea police, telling me why it's wrong, it's not going to work, the PowerPoint won't, And then I'm sitting here, well, what if it doesn't work? What if I look foolish? What if I upset my boss? So in brainstorming, it just depletes the energy in the room. I've developed a whole series of techniques. I don't have time for them all, but one of my favorites is a technique called rollstorming, R-O-L-E. So rollstorming is brainstorming in character. So in this case, instead of you being Anne, like imagine you're playing the role of Steve Jobs. Now you're taking a real world business issue, but no one's going to laugh at Steve for coming up with a big idea. They might laugh at Steve for coming up with a small idea. So in this example, you are liberated to say anything you want with no fear of retribution. And so the way it's so simple, I love getting those little "Hello, my name is" stickers. And everyone I'm Ernest Hemingway. I'm a supermodel. I'm an athlete. I'm an alien from the future. I'm a villain. And you stay in character. I know it sounds really weird, but you will be blown away how effective this is. I did this once with a group of executives at Sony Japan. I met this man. He was the stiffest human being I'd ever met in my life. Dark suit, white shirt, his tie is strangling him. Anyway, we got him rollstorming as Yoda. And I have never seen personal transformation like this. This dude's jacket's off, his tie's undone, he's leaping around the room, and the whiteboards were filled with ideas. The truth is, I didn't teach him to be creative. He had that inside, as we all do. But the role he was in forbid it. And you put a little bit of structure around it, and he was able to take the lid off, and the ideas really started to fly.
I love that. And it mirrors so much of what we've seen around needing structured approaches to engage all the different types of thinking in ideation, or what we traditionally call brainstorming. On your point about brainstorming sucking, I guess. I think one of the things that's really interesting is that Alex Osborne's original rules for brainstorming are often ignored. Things like deferring judgment and going for quantity. All those go out the window when you kind of get into a brainstorming, right? But we do the same thing where we try and use specific, often more brain writing techniques where you're kind of doing individual ideation first, but where you're channeling different quadrants of thinking, different ways of thinking. So, for the analytical type of thinking, how do you start to elicit and think through problem definition frameworks, right? On the sort of the practical side of things, implementation and time boxing and some of those tools. As you said, in the relational side, empathy mapping, role playing, user journey thinking, some of those components. And of course, there's the component of sort of the experimental big picture thinking, right? The what if sort of scenarios, but that's just one piece of it, right? And actually, Ned Herrmann, our founder, always liked to say innovation is creativity with a job to do, right? And so, all of those components come together to really make for successful innovation. And I know, Josh, you talk a lot about systematic creativity. Are there other routines or tools that you use to make creativity more a part of everyday work?
Yeah, by the way, just a quick comment. I love that phrase that innovation is creativity with a job to do. And that's exactly right. Creativity is just the expression of any net new idea. But to me, innovation, the difference is that there's some utility in that idea. So I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think one thing that's helpful is just to frame it. So often people think of this word, innovation, as this gigantic, overwhelming thing with some minimum threshold. Like if my idea isn't worth $1 billion, it's not innovative. And I think about it in a few different flavors. So all capital letters, that word in all capital letters, that's the big stuff. Inventing penicillin or the internet. Awesome. And that's what gets all the headlines, but that's not the only flavor. So then I think about that word just with a capital I and the rest of the word lowercase. Capital I innovations to me are the 2 or 3 a year that anyone might land on that maybe don't make a documentary about you and they don't make history, but they create a meaningful outcome. And then my favorite is the all lowercase version of that, which is the 2 or 3 a day instead of 2 or 3 a year. And so I think about these as micro innovations. As mentioned, my most recent book was called Big Little Breakthrough, same kind of thing. But the idea is that these baby ones are much easier to get to. They build skill, they're less risky, and they're accessible to everybody in the organization. So my suggestion, you're asking about what are some rituals? I don't suggest people say, how can I change the entire unit and galaxy with one big idea? You'll be scratching your head for a long time. The best way I like doing is chipping away at stuff with little ideas. And you're starting to building skill. And so instead of saying, how can I solve this massive problem? How can I solve environmental change globally with one idea? Good luck. On the other hand, if you're like, could I think of 15 little teeny baby ideas that might make some teeny little small impact in environmental quality? That's a much easier problem to solve. So the thing I like to do is take the stakes down. And then you start to create rituals around how can I come up with a higher volume of little baby innovations rather than taking the weight of the world on your shoulders to come up with something gigantic.
Josh, I'm just curious, do you have any daily creativity habits?
I do. Yeah, I actually narrowed it down. I spend literally 2 minutes a day, 2 minutes a day every morning. First minute, I consume the creativity of others. I'm a jazz musician, so I might listen to a Coltrane song. I might stare at a painting, read a poem out loud. Look at a cool business, by the way. It doesn't have to be, traditional arts, but it just sort of gets me anchored, and I'm getting in the zone, getting in the flow. And then the other minute, I do basically like creative jumping jacks. I take on an unrelated problem that has nothing to do with me personally. I don't have a stake in the outcome, and I just say the same thing. How can I chip away at it? So, for example, I know that traffic in Atlanta in rush hour is pretty bad. I don't live in Atlanta. I don't have, I have no stake in the outcome. So my 1 minute might be, what are some ways that I could help reduce traffic in Atlanta in rush hour? Not solve it, reduce it. And so, or like, how could I recruit the Olympics to hold the next event in the city of Detroit? Or, how could I improve the flow at a TSA line in an airport? And so what it's doing is not so much outcome focus, it's more practice focus. It's doing jumping jacks for your creativity. And I literally spend 2 minutes a day. It took me longer than 2 days to explain it. But you do that for 30 days, blown away. You'll be blown away at the impact that creates.
I love that. It's just like a muscle, right? I mean, you really need to work it out. I love Big Little Breakthroughs, by the way. That was one of my little feed the creative part of who I am by reading it. And getting so much validation of what we teach. And this idea of micro ideas, not just the moonshots. Again, people carry this baggage around, it can't have value unless it's big. What inspired that for you? And how do you get everybody truly bought in where they're not just sitting there going like, oh no, this doesn't have that much value. Nobody's going to think this is important, et cetera. Like, how do you get others totally bought into that? Because it's true. And I think, again, so many people are afraid to bring something up that might seem too small or not really brilliant, et cetera. I'm curious how you help leaders kind of get to a place where they create that space where that actually happens.
One of the things that really shocked me is that people didn't identify as creative. Like even the companies that I was building, some of the most incredibly creative, talented people, I'd be like, oh, you're so innovative. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm not a creative person. What? What do you mean? Oh, the creative set up on the third floor. What? What are you talking about? Like you just solved this problem for a client. What do you mean? Oh, that's not creativity. So it was this weird thing. And I was observing that people were sort of opting out of this label for some reason. And they tended to be really wildly creative people. And so I started thinking that people had such a narrow definition of what is creativity, what's the minimum threshold, all that kind of stuff. And I said, well, you just did this. Like, oh, you'd call that creative, but that didn't make $1 billion. That's not exhibited in an art museum. Yeah, but it was still creative nonetheless. So I just kind of came on that through observing brilliant creativity and people not taking any credit for it. In terms of how you can drive that thinking into organizations, I think obviously, if there's directive or enthusiasm from leadership, that certainly helps. But it doesn't always have to be top down. It can actually be bottom up. If someone is thinking like, I'm at the water cooler, my boss doesn't understand me, this darn company, they use the word they a lot. If they would only do this and they would only do this, so they're pushing away ownership. They may not have the authority to make $1 billion investment. True. But could they make a $5 investment in 10 minutes? And so it actually is not only good for the organization, but it's good for the human being, because now you're like, wow, I get to leave my fingerprints on this. I get to have a voice. And so the ideal situation, it comes from both top and bottom, and they sort of meet in the middle. But a lot of it is stepping into a new identity, which, again, leaders can help, and organizations like yours help a lot, which is that, yeah, you know what? I'm an artist. I can't paint. I don't do interpretive dance. I don't spoken word poetry, but I'm an artist. I'm a finance artist. I'm a customer service artist. I'm a sales artist. And so the more that people can say, I can sort of own my ability to be creative and then start deploying those skills, even in little baby ways, just the little steps, that it starts to build momentum. This natural groundswell happens. I made a comment in the book that Da Vinci's first painting wasn't the Mona Lisa. And we think, oh, we just sat down and whipped out the Mona Lisa. Yeah, years of learning to paint and painting lousy things and making mistakes and and over time you develop the skill to create the Mona Lisa. You don't start there. You start with those little baby ones and start to learn to paint and make it a habit. And so the more that leaders can encourage that type of thinking, the more this beautiful gift will start to unfold naturally.
Josh, I'm curious, I've seen studies that the majority of economic growth comes from incremental innovation, right? 77%. And I'm curious how you think about ROI as it relates specifically to innovation, like returns on innovation, if you want to replace the I. How do you think about sort of that equation?
Great question. There are some things that you can model directly, but there's also some of it's nonlinear, which is hard for I don't remember which color it is, but people who are super, analytical and more literal to understand. But, think about if you just bought a set of paintbrushes for $11 and some paint for $38 and a blank canvas for $86, and then, but that would be the incremental cost. You'd add it up. What's the total? Yeah, but if Picasso painted that, it'd be worth $150 million. So there's a nonlinear jump when innovation or creativity is unlocked. You start to get to help convince people. You say, well, what's the risk of not doing that? Irrelevance, mediocrity. Like, how's Pan Am Airlines doing these days? How are things at Oldsmobile? Yeah, so I think it's important to weigh the real risk of standing still. That's the trap that most people fall into, which is that they falsely believe that the status quo is safe, and it turns out often that's the riskiest move of all. And so the ROI calculation can come from something like, okay, I mean, you probably do this all the time. So but like you might say, hey, if we generated 100 ideas in a company over a 12-month period, and they're focused ideas and properly modeled out and such, and let's say you group them, let's say 50 of them were worth 0, and you got 50 left, and let's say you say 30 of them of the remainder are going to be micro things that are practical but not have a huge return. 5 are medium, and then 5 are really big. What's the in a big company? What's the ROI assumption for a really big idea, a medium one, and a small one? And then you can map it out and say, okay, our innovation investment this year was X, but even in these ratios, it turns out to be 30X. So you can start to make a case pretty quickly, and that the CFOs can get their arms around. But I always like modeling just this bottoms up thing. Like, okay, what if you can have a high volume of little stuff? And if you can make the case there, then you actually have optionality on the big stuff. Like, if you never had a big idea, so what? There's still an ROI in the little stuff. And by the way, wow, what if one of those is a medium one? What if one of those is a big one? And then the finance people start to get their arms around it.
I'm hearing a little of the venture capitalists come out in here right now. Josh, that's interesting. But the notion of a portfolio of innovations, right, and those being big and small innovations, routinely works better, right, than the one big moonshot, right? So I think there's a lot of weight behind what you say.
Like, it comes out not only in the direct revenue or profit from a particular thing, like a product, but there's also an internal ROI, because people are study after study more engaged, more likely to stay at the job, more productive. It's a great recruiting mechanism, it's a great retention mechanism, great morale mechanism. So one of the things we have to consider is that the just mere expression of human creativity, because that's who we're built to be, validates people and gets them they have a stake in the outcome, and they can leave their fingerprints on it. And so that is a big ancillary benefit on productivity, morale, engagement, et cetera.
So how does innovation and approaches to innovation, how does that influence the way you think about the startups that you invest in?
Pretty deeply, actually. Our fund is called, so I run a venture fund for that. I was not, isn't familiar with it. It's not huge, about $165 million, where we invest in early stage tech companies. And it's called Mudita Venture Partners, MUDITA. Mudita is a Sanskrit term, which means taking joy in other people's success. So by the way, when I look at the work that you've done, it fills me with joy. I'm not jealous. I'm just happy and proud for you. Like, it's awesome. So many venture funds are very ruthless and cutthroat, and we decided to do the opposite, which is we're outcome focused. We're not soft, but we're doing it in a way of compassion and kindness and generosity as a force multiplier. And so our fund, we first of all look at, is there if the company scales, is there going to be a positive impact on the world? And that's an important thing for us, and if not, we're not really a good investor. But then we start to say, how novel is the initial idea? But more importantly than that, how creative is the team? Because an initial idea, in my experience, is often wrong. It's short shelf life. And that real growth often comes from taking an idea, and then it's the idea that leads to the idea that leads to another idea. And it's the ability to adapt innovatively over time rather than just some giant lightning bolt from the heavens. And so while we do evaluate initial business models and such, I'm really looking carefully at how is this team going to be able to co-create the future? How are they going to be able to adjust? Can they get into a state of collaborative flow? And so I'm actually more evaluating the team than the idea.
Which makes a lot of sense. And especially when you think about sort of the secret sauce in so many creative breakthroughs and innovations, it's not the result of just one person, right? Again, creativity, innovation, those are team sports, and having the right team together can bring out all the different nuances, all of the different small or micro innovations that are required to ultimately result in, a larger breakthrough innovation. So I'm totally behind you on that. In fact, our sort of philosophy with our new venture that I'm building at med.ai is in many ways actually a result of what you kind of refer to as the test kitchen approach that came out of years of working with Herrmann. And over the years, we've done all this experimentation about how we might think differently about measuring the different ways that people think, right? And then how do we take little innovations in the way that we measure the differences in the way that we think and weave those differently into people's daily workflows to unlock more creativity or better results in this area or that area. So while we're on the test kitchen philosophy, I'd love to hear some of your favorite examples of how leaders have created sort of the right environments for low-risk creative experiments.
Well, that is the notion of a test kitchen for anyone that hadn't read the book, which is that, restaurants don't come up with a new menu item on a busy Saturday night. They have a separate space with some ingredients and equipment, and they sort of tinker. It's a tinkering lab in a safe, controlled environment where there's psychological safety, which we talked about earlier, et cetera. And that's what I find to be the best, sort of rigorous and sort of step-by-step path to innovation. It's not trying to solve some giant thing with perfection. It's what can you experiment? And it's just this notion of being a constant experimenter. I've learned that the best leaders are the best experimenters. The best innovators are the best experimenters. The best artists are the best experimenters. And so one of the things that I'll share is a practical thing. Anne asked earlier about practical ideas. We all have a to-do list. I recommend, hopefully everyone after listening today keeps a second running list. Why not keep a to-test list? And the to-test list, anytime an idea pops in your head, big, weird, small, half-baked, no judgment, stick it on the list. Here's the fun part. The mere existence of the list will boost your ability to be creative because it's like an ongoing reminder. But then periodically, once a week or so, grab your crew. What am I going to test this week? You might test 5 things and 4 automatically going to fail. Okay. So these are small, crude, cheap, fast experiments, $20 in 20 minutes kind of stuff. If something shows promise, don't go wild, just expand the size of the experiment. If this still looks good, expand the size of that experiment. And by the time you bring something to life, you've taken a massive amount of risk off the table. And it's just this very easy, safe way to bring things forward. Just to share it personally, I mentioned my venture fund, I have a to-test list. I also am, a writer and I speak a lot. And so I have a to-test list for that. I practice. I have investments in over 30 startups, active startups. I keep a separate to-test list for each of them. I keep a to-test list for my home. I keep a to-test list for my marriage. I keep a to-test list for my family and kids. And so again, I'm always thinking like, I could be in the car. What can I test with this? I'll try to do this at bedtime with my kids or whatever. And it's just, for me, it's been liberating. I've been doing it for a couple of years, actually several years now. And it's just a great way to bring ideas out of the ether and put them into action.
One of the things that we focus on is bringing together the collision of different thinking preferences to create new thinking, right? And it's really that, and it often creates a bit of contention in a conversation, but it's also the beauty of difference coming together. And I guess one of the things that we've always advocated is, again, creating the openness to hearing something that is so totally foreign to how you think that you can actually take it in and do something with it. And of course, when you're in a group where everybody thinks the same way, that just leads you down a very specific path. So I guess, when you look at the examples that you've seen, how have you seen those differences? And you were talking about the importance of the team, and I'm right there with you. That's the secret sauce is what's coming out of that team. It's rarely just one solo entrepreneur who's going to do this brilliantly on their own. And they often need different perspectives to actually make the venture successful. So what, in your experience, how have you seen those different perspectives come together in a team and really work well to drive the kind of innovation that you want to have happen?
You're touching on a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. And it's actually the topic of my next book. I'm just beginning. I don't even have a title yet, but the idea behind the book is I'm sure you've studied flow state, which is this notion of really being in a creative state of flow. And by the way, that's not an on-off switch. That can be a continuum. So you could be a little in flow, but the idea is, you're really getting creative. But so I'm going to write a book. My forthcoming book is going to be about creative collaboration, collaborative creativity, or co-flow, you might say. We are getting into a state of flow with others. And really, often, not always, but this notion of like a lone genius is the source of innovation is more rare than you might think. Usually it's a collaborative effort. It's sort of like a band. Even though there might be a lead singer that's on the cover of the album, it's really the band that came up with the ideas together, and is bouncing ideas in this collaborative state of creativity. So I think that is, by the way, way more powerful and more needed approach, especially as the stakes get higher with AI and competition and everything else. So I'm really excited to get to bring that to life, coming like in 2 or 3 years to a bookstore near you, maybe 4, I don't know, we'll see. I got a lot of research to do. But to answer your question, I've seen a lot of cool examples. One of I've loved is I wrote about this in my first book, which is called Disciplined Dreaming. It's a technique that was developed in tribal groups in Africa called an Imbizo group. What happened was, historically, if they were trying to solve a problem in a particular tribe, they'd go to the chief, and whoever had the most authority, that would solve the problem. But didn't mean it was the best answer. So they started doing the opposite. They would assemble this weird, diverse mix of people. They might ask a kid to join. They might ask a neighboring village person to join. They might ask someone who knows nothing about the problem to join. And the goal wasn't that one person would solve it. It's that one idea and perspective might lead to something else, it might lead to something else, and then the problem will be solved collaboratively. And so the idea is, because you're exactly right, diversity drives innovation, full stop. And not only, all types of diversity, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, age diversity, racial diversity, education diversity, idea diversity, all diversity. And so when I've done this, I do this for companies sometimes, we'll form an Imbizo group. So let's say you're working for a rental car company. Your first thing would be get a bunch of business people that rent cars and tell us what you need. In an Imbizo group, you might get someone who's never been in a car. And then you might add a poet, and then you might add an industrial engineer, and you might add a neuroscientist. And so again, it's the idea of you put enough different perspectives together, and in that cauldron, like in the martini shaker, and start shaking, it's wild what comes out. And so that's one practical way. That can be done very simply, by the way. But simply put, you put enough diversity in a safe environment, attacking a single problem, different lenses come into place, and ideas start to flow.
Well, I mentioned I'm a big music fan, jazz in particular. I'm curious, tell me a little bit about how your musical background influences your approach to innovation and creativity.
So I started a company at age 20. I'd never taken a business course, didn't know anything about business, but I knew jazz. And jazz became an incredible business teacher for me, an entrepreneurial teacher. And it's just, I still, again, so passionate about the art form. I know not everyone loves listening to it, by the way. It's an acquired taste. I'm glad that you do. I heard a funny one recently that a country musician plays 3 chords to 100,000 people in the audience. A jazz musician plays 100,000 chords to 3 people in the audience. So I get it. But jazz as an art form is exactly what we're being called to do in business. If you put the musical instruments off for a second, what is playing jazz? It's navigating ambiguity, uncertainty. It's situational awareness and active listening. It's getting into a collaborative state of creativity. It's passing the baton of leadership back and forth in real time. It's improvising to deliver the best possible outcomes. It's recovering quickly from setbacks. And if that's exactly how leaders are being called to lead right now. And I'll also say that I think there's actually a fundamental shift happening right now in the world, partly because of AI, and there's other factors too. But in the past, great leaders were often great classical musicians. And I'm not being disparaging of classical music. I love classical music. But the role of many, not all, many classical musicians is to play the notes exactly as Mozart intended. So they're wonderful technicians, and they're following the process, and they're doing the checklist, and they're essentially performing somebody else's art. But now we don't have the luxury of sheet music. We're being called to perform at our best without all the notes in front of us. And so we're on some random team with new people, and we have to figure it out. And that's what jazz is all about. And so I think that where people have relied on that their training and their checklists in the past, that may not be enough to really soar in this current and future era. So again, I almost feel like there's this groundswell, like we have to become jazz musician leaders or business artists to meet the challenges of the day.
It's interesting. Some years ago, I saw an ad posted that said, jazz piano lessons, a step-by-step approach to improvisation. And I think a lot of people want that step-by-step thing, right? And in today's environment, there's so much uncertainty. Every leader that I work with is just overwhelmed by the degree of uncertainty. And you talk about that comfort with navigating the uncertainty, not having the sheet music. What can leaders do? How do they create a space where you can thrive in the uncertainty rather than having it shut you down? Because it's just another piece of the fear equation, in my view. And I think it's one of those things that is creeping in to our world more and more every day. And even if somebody's pretty comfortable with new thinking, the uncertainty stuff just creeps in. So what are your thoughts on that and how leaders can help there?
Yeah, there can be rituals and rewards around it. I've seen people say that your bonus partly is tied to what you produced, achieved, but partly tied to how you failed. and say that, you took some responsible risks. You can't just say like, I tried something stupid. Like, obviously you have to have some good judgment in it, but people are rewarded for having, thoughtful, good ideas. Their numbers made sense. They went for it, didn't work out. And so rewarding that actually can create the sense that you're describing. Also, I think part of it is just this mindset shift that it really is incumbent on leaders to try to cultivate, where it's saying, okay, I want you to feel in a safe kind of jazz environment. And that's what's required for us to win. So part of my job as a leader is to help you build the skills that are required for us all to win.
Thank you so much for taking the time today, Josh. It's been a great conversation. And for our audience, we'll make sure to link to Josh's book and website in the show notes and some of the great work that he's done, along with some of the different references that we talked about today. Thanks, everybody, for joining us for another great episode, and have a wonderful day to Josh and the rest of our team.
Thank you so much.